Hi, hope you're well. I mentioned in a previous video that we're drifting away from working exclusively in sheet goods like this birch ply. And in this one, we're going to be looking at 5 basic woodworking joints that'll come in handy, particularly when using solid timber. And if that all sounds like a little bit of a scary prospect, we'll be sure to subscribe, because there'll be another video before too long where I show you how you can make these exact same joints that I'm talking about today, and maybe a couple of variations too, using nothing but sheet goods. For today though, we're working mostly with sticks and natural timber, and to start with, let's take a look at a couple of really simple joints that you might be familiar with already. So a rebate is a super simple joint, a little square or rectangular notch that runs the length of the workpiece, lets another piece sit into it, usually flush with the edge. The benefit of this is that it gives you a half to a third as much gluing area again as a straight butt joint. It puts the glued surfaces at 90 degrees to each other, so it's a more resistive joint. And if it's in compression, so the weight, the forces applied on it are from above or below, that lip is extremely supportive and very strong. A rebate has other properties too. I like to use it when I'm making drawers. I run a rebate around 3 edges of the fascia so it sits nicely into the drawer box, so there's less of the edge grain on show. It's strong because it's glued in those 2 planes, and you can also fix it discreetly through the side of the drawer box into the fascia, leaving the drawer front completely unblemished and with no complex or expensive fittings required. In fact, these drawers were simply glued together and are holding up just fine. You can make rebates with nothing but an entry-level track saw, or you can clean them up on a router table if you want the best possible finish. You can rebate the back, the top or the base into a cabinet or bookcase, as well as these drawer fascias, and you can make that rebate as wide or as narrow as you're comfortable with. It's a flexible and versatile joint that's really easy to make. Kind of related to the rebate is the housing or dado joint. This is often used for a fixed shelf in a cabinet or bookcase, for example, and it's where a groove of the same thickness as the shelf is cut into the carcass side, and the shelf fits snugly into it. It's called a housing because the shelf is housed within the groove, and it's called a dado because I've no idea. It's good for shelves because the shelf is located precisely in both sides of the carcass, and while it doesn't have any strength in tension, the shelf could pull out of the carcass sides if they bowed, for example. Like the rebate, it's very strong in compression, so the shelves could be loaded up without any real fear of them pulling out of the sides, provided that the housing is deep enough. If you ever have to take apart an older piece of furniture with shelves in housings, it's not unusual to find a few small pins or nails driven into the carcass through the shelf to help prevent that bowing of the sides. Again, housings can be cut with just a track saw, but more often with a router or perhaps a dado stack fitted in a table saw if you have one and live where such things can be used without compromising health and safety regulations. But if you're just using a track saw, it might be worth changing to a flat ground blade so you get as clean and flat a base to the housing, to the dado, as possible. And that's one of the downsides of the housing joint, because everything is on show at the edge. It needs to be nice and tight, otherwise it can look kind of messy. Alright, so what about joining 2 sticks together to make an L or T joint? Well, I touched on this in the previous video, and while you could just butt joint them together and hope that modern glues do their job, and I've got to be honest, I still can't break this one apart that I made in the previous video with my bare hands. I have an idea to make something that's just glued together to see how that holds up over time. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to see. So yeah, despite modern glues, you will get a stronger joint if you use something like a simple half lap. A half lap is exactly as it sounds, where you remove half the material thickness from where the 2 battens, the 2 sticks, overlap, and this gives a remarkable 3 times the gluing area of a simple butt joint. You can cut the half lap for an L joint with just a track saw. You can do it with what's called trenching cuts on a miter saw. You can do it on a table saw, sliding table or cross-cut sled, recommended of course, or just on a router table, or any combination of those. For the T-joint half lap, if you're using just a track saw, you'll need to make several passes at the same depth, like the trenching cuts on the miter saw, and again a flat ground blade will be useful here, but you may still need to clean the joint up with a chisel to get the best finish. You can use a half lap L joint anywhere where you want a workpiece, a frame say, to be a consistent thickness, and a T-joint for a frame cross member to an upright. I used half laps when I made the thin frames for my light diffusers a while back, and they're still going strong despite being up in the heat of the ceiling and right next to the warm lights all day long. A variation of the half lap is the cross lap, basically two female halves of the joint overlaid and used to attach a cross member to a mid upright, for example. It's a stronger joint than the simple half lap because the rebates locate the two halves precisely. There's only one direction that they can pull apart, but like the half lap, it does rely on the glue alone for strength, unless you're going to use some kind of mechanical fixings as well. So how about instead of a half lap, you did a 1/3 lap? Well, that's what we call a bridle joint. And instead of taking half the material thickness where the two battens overlap, we take a third off each side of the male half of the joint to make a tenon. And we take a third out of the middle of the female joint to make the slot or mortise. This joint takes a little bit more practice to do well because the tenon not only has to fit snugly in the slot, but it has to be exactly in the center, otherwise the faces of the frame won't sit flush. Again, you can cut the tenon with just a track saw, but a bandsaw, table saw, miter saw and router table can all be used as well, and the slot can also be done with those same tools. The benefit of the bridle joint is that it has loads of gluing area, so it's a very strong joint. It's also an attractive joint if done well, but it is a joint that demands precision. That's for the corner or L joint. For a T bridle joint, we do the joint sort of in reverse, with the upright having 2/3 of the material removed and the cross member 1/3 in the center. Again, this makes for a good looking and very strong joint, resistant to racking, with even more gluing area than the corner bridle, but it is a lot more effort though to get the accuracy that you need. But it's an excellent joint to practice your skills on if you need it. And let's finish up with a mortise and tenon joint, and this is one that I prepared before the program started, back when I did my loose tenon basics video. A mortise and tenon joint is one of the oldest joints around, been used for thousands of years, not just in woodworking but stonemasonry and blacksmithing too. It was used by the ancient Egyptians, the Phoenicians and the sarsen stones in Stonehenge are held together by admittedly fairly rudimentary mortise and tenons too. Mortise and tenons can be used in pretty much any piece of furniture, and like the bridle joint, the end of the rail is cut down to around 1/3 of its thickness with a corresponding mortise cut in to accept it. There are many variations on the mortise and tenon. This is a stub tenon, so it doesn't go all the way through, and the tenon also has top and bottom shoulders cut to it, all the better to hide my shonky hand-cut mortise. The tenon can be cut by any of the various methods we'd also use for the bridle joint, but the mortise needs some extra care, either drilling it out and finishing up with hand tools, using a router, or a dedicated mortising machine if you have enough of them to do to justify it. Mortise and tenon joints are very strong joints, often used in larger joinery like doors and windows, as well as smaller pieces of furniture like side tables and chairs, and indeed this footstool that I made when I was just 16. The legs are attached to the top rails with a honged tenon for extra strength, and the bottom rails are attached with through tenons. If you wanted that to be a super strong joint without using glue at all, you could wedge the through tenons and you could draw bore or pin the honged tenons at the top. But it's got to be said, these simple glued joints have held together for 47 years so far and show no signs of letting go just yet. So there you go, 5 basic woodworking joints that will cover the vast majority of projects that you're likely to take on. And it goes without saying that any of these joints can be made with simple hand tools if you have the time, or want to hone your hand tool skills. Personally, I'll take the instant results you get from power tools and dust collection all day long, but that's just me. I'll call this one done for this week though. Thanks so much for taking a look. Thanks as always for the endless patience of my 10-minute workshop plus members who've been living with these projects and these practice joints for far too long. And be sure to join me in the next one when I'll be faking all these joints using nothing but strips of sheet goods. But that's all for now. Thanks so much for stopping by and look forward to seeing you again very soon. All right, take care.